You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn connects you with experts from all over the world to help you take charge of your career, your business, and your life. Rap along with us. Visit drjacalyn.com to learn how to become a guest or a sponsor. And now, the doctor is in.
Hello and welcome. You are watching USA Global TV, or maybe you're listening in on Business Talk Radio. This show is in the name of love, all things about love. I'm your host, executive producer, director, and broadcast engineer, Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck, and my co-host, Kimmy Seltzer, is with us today. How are you, Kimmy?
Good. How are you?
Good. I can't keep up with all the things that you're doing.
I was just going to say the same to you, my dear. Yeah, we still find time in the name of love, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Kimmy, since I saw you last, what are all the great things that you're working on?
Yes, it was so exciting. I think last time we talked, I was mentioning that I have this course, Get Your Sexy Back course, and I'm happy to say we pretty much filled it. I actually have one more slot available if anyone's interested in it, but you got to hop on fast. Just go to askkimmy.com and say, hey, I want in because we have our class tonight. But it's been amazing. Last week we talked about getting over your fears, and it was so powerful. And it was something I actually wanted to share with you because, a lot of women had a ton of breakthroughs around it, didn't realize that so much of their fears were causing their love shield, right? Like fear of rejection or fear of abandonment. There's actually 5 common fears that are kind of underlying a lot of the superficial fears we feel. And they didn't realize how much of that was just causing them to just be paralyzed, whether it was flirting or putting themselves out there. And a lot of it was attached to things that they've experienced previously. So it was super powerful. And that's why I love doing these kind of things because, breaking those barriers, it just gets people unstuck. And women were emailing me already just in 1 week that they were starting to practice getting over just one fear based on the exercise that I gave them. And, once you do one thing, it gives you the confidence to move on.
That's great, Kimmy. Thank you for sharing that. And a question that comes to mind to you as a coach and as a therapist, some places in the world, obviously, people are still in a lockdown or people are choosing to stay inside and not socialize because of fear. And so my question is, the longer this takes place, and by the way, I'm in this category, the longer this takes place, the more that fear starts to build up to the point where you think, oh my gosh, I'll never have a relationship again because it's too terrifying to even integrate with people. So what would you say to someone about that?
I love that you mentioned that. It's so funny because I just had a call with somebody and I was talking to her about that. And what we're seeing out there is whether you had fears before the pandemic hit or not, being by yourself and isolation, it just is exacerbating some of the fears that you might have had, or it's causing new ones, And so people are suddenly finding themselves like, I don't even know what to do and where to go and how to socialize and that kind of thing. And I think, and here's the thing that we discovered that was to our surprise during the pandemic, and at least with my clients, is that people started really building emotional connections with others and not relying on the physical part. So no matter what ends up happening in the world or in your situation, learning how to get over your fears by just putting yourself out there in different ways. And yes, it can be virtual, or maybe it's just, flirting online and getting used to being open to possibilities and creating a connection with someone. I think what happens is that our fears also make things so big in our mind. It's like, wait, I'm not ready to date. I'm like, well, wait a second. If we could just take the word dating out of the equation and just focus on, how about saying hello to a guy, just really thinking at that, what would that do to your fears and how can we break them? So yeah, I really like to, and I don't know if this is where you're at, but just like, maybe it's just going on Bumble for 30 minutes a day and saying hi to a bunch of guys without having expectations around it.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. I'm going to bring our guest on, but I just have one other comment, which is I went to the grocery store, which I typically do every 2 weeks. And this time it was very different because I don't know what the percentage was, but a lot of people had on masks. And I started thinking, I wonder if I should be wearing a mask, even though I'm vaccinated. It's kind of like, so all these things go on in our minds, right? And so it's hard to break it all down, but I know that it's stuff that needs to be addressed and eliminated, that fear.
And you can still smile behind a mask, and you can say hi behind a mask is my
that's that's true.
Right.
That's true. We did have a guest who wrote a book. I think it was called Always Say Hi, something to that effect.
Right.
When we first, yeah. All right. So let's bring out our guest today, Deborah Roth. She's a relationship coach and she's an interfaith minister, and she's got a big event that's coming up very soon. Welcome, Deborah.
Hi, wonderful Deborah. To be here with you, Dr. J and Kimmy. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you with us. So let's start off just with, before we get into your background, tell us about this big event that's coming up.
Well, I've got, so if you're talking about my weddings.
Yes.
That's coming up, which feels so good after, I had a couple Zoom weddings, but didn't really get into that with my couples. And I have a really wonderful wedding this weekend in the Hamptons, which is a really beautiful part of Long Island, for those that don't know it. And then I just this afternoon, so I'm so primed to talk about love, Kimmy. Just this afternoon was finishing up the wedding for a couple that's being married over Labor Day weekend. And then I've got a couple other ones in between, but it brings together the best of, I love all the things that I do. I work with people in transitions. I'm a relationship coach, with couples and singles, and weddings just kind of bring it all together. And I'm a ritual person. My master's thesis was on the power of ritual, and I lead women's circles. So a wedding ceremony is probably the coolest, most fun ritual, life passage ritual. Well, most of us will go through or attend, that's fun too. And then it's all about relationships and really getting to know my couples and supporting them as much as they have time to do before the ceremony. So many of them do premarital coaching, but then they run out of, or they say they want to, and they run out of time. So we do it like post-wedding, post-marital coaching. But it's all about creating a strong foundation, whether they're married officially or not.
I love that you kind of do it all, but that the wedding is almost like a symbol of all the things they've been working on and towards. I have a client that I started working with, oh my gosh, I want to say 3 years ago. I'm happy to say she landed a man, and with, hard work, and she's getting married. And all these things are now starting to bubble up, right? Like the family of origin issues and navigating and compromising each other. And her anxiety is through the roof, and she's moving on top of it. So, what I was saying to her, and this is what I was curious about for you, is I say, this is such good practice for the two of you to build that communication and foundation for each other, because these are things that you're going to continue to work on. But this ritual is like almost like a capsule of all the things that you have to work on. Do you find that to be true as well? Issues that you work on with people? Yeah.
You nailed it, Kimmy. Ritual is all about symbols, and symbols are the language of the unconscious. So whether we're pulling symbols out of our unconscious, like we do with dreams and interpreting our dreams, or whether we're taking symbols like, a wedding ring or the unity candle, or, the many different beautiful wedding traditions from around the world that you can incorporate into a ceremony. And I think for me, I often say, because I'm an interfaith minister, I marry all kinds of couples, different faiths. And I would say the things that I hear most often, the phrase that I hear most often is that they want something spiritual, but not religious. And so I introduce them to a whole bunch of ideas There's universal ones like hand fasting, which is actually, it's tying the knot. It's when you clasp your hands and your hands are bound. And that's actually a tradition in cultures around the world. Mexicans have what they call a lasso, and they wrap a lasso around the couple's shoulders. The Filipinos do a similar thing with a scarf. Many of us have seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and they, Greek Orthodox have the Stephana, the crown that connects them. So there's beautiful symbolism there. And I'm always really clear with my couples, and they see it on my website. They know that that's really, a passion with me, is that the entire ceremony, regardless of what rituals they decide to do or not, is such a launching pad. And all of them, I'm pretty flexible. I always tell my couples, you can put words in my mouth, you can take words out of my mouth. But the one thing I would say that I'm most lovingly nudgy about is having them write their own vows. And to take the time to do that, to think about what they love about each other, and then what they promise to each other, and then to have it witnessed by the people who are most important to them is huge. And it's the best part of the ceremony too. I know I do what I do really well, but hands down, when you hear them talk to each other, oftentimes with, tears, hopefully not sobbing. We work on that part. But it's a really important symbolic foundation to the rest of their marriage.
I was wondering.
We actually have a comment. From Philip Chan. Hi, Philip. Strangers are just friends who haven't met yet. Page 2 in my 12-year-old granddaughter's book, Friendship. That's cute.
Cute.
Very cute. Yeah. Something I wanted to bring up just to touch on briefly, because I think there's a really cool connection between a therapist and an interfaith minister, if you think about it, because a lot of times people will go to a therapist or coach beforehand, get everything ironed out. There's a reality TV show on, I think it's called Love is Blind, or Is Love Blind? And I've actually been fascinated with it based on this experiment that can people fall in love sight unseen? And then once they do see each other, can they get that physical connection that they've never had because they never saw each other, and then they walk down the aisle, and what happens? So I just want to just briefly touch on that from your experience as an interfaith minister and relationship coach, and then from a therapist. What do you think? I haven't seen the rest of the show, but can people truly connected and stay in love, fall in love, stay in love, based on that premise of meeting without ever seeing each other?
Well, if you consider that in cultures all over the world, arranged marriages have basically been that. And so they've had to figure out, how to find common ground and where to meet and how to negotiate, their differences. Obviously, it's not a thing that I would that I'd recommend across the board, because I do think that chemistry is a real thing. But having said that, I can also tell you the number of couples that I've married who started out being friends, and then just things shifted over the years, and they turned around and looked at each other in a new way and realized that they were in love with each other. So yes, I think you can build a relationship based on, really strong interaction and not seeing them. And I think that's a really key element as well.
Thank you. Kimmy, I'm going to turn to you now, and then we'll take a commercial break. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you, Deborah. And, actually, it relates to what you and I were talking about on the top of the show. It's not too different than what we're talking about with the pandemic. I think it's not whether or not it can happen, it's how it happens. Right. So, if you learn to build an emotional connection with someone sight unseen and not rely on the physicality of it, I think it can be a very powerful relationship. I do this thing with my clients. I call it the chemistry analysis, because I think a lot of times we think of chemistry as being physical, but there's so many other areas of chemistry. There's emotional, there's intellectual, there's spiritual, and really taking a look at where where do you rely on it the most? And sometimes there's patterns there. If you're always relying on the physical, maybe you should do a love is blind test for you and try to build an emotional connection. So I think it's more the process than whether or not can it work.
Yeah. I think it's really important too to remember that we all, I mean, we're embodied beings. So at some point we want that embodied experience. The hitch, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Kimmy, is that if you jump into the physical piece before you've gotten the emotional chemistry established, like you were saying, then that's not so great either. I mean, in fact, that's where a lot of relationships crash and burn, is that they do their hookup, and then that's fine if that's what you go into it as, but you both sides of the relationship, both sides of the couple have to go into it with the same expectations, and kind of set some ground rules if that's what you're going to do. Having a great physical relationship is terrific, but if you want it to be more than that, you've got to be direct and honest about it.
I think it's kind of interesting because with the one couple, they really had this great connection. And then when she saw him, it was like, oh, and now they are together in this environment. So my point is that when you have a physical connection with someone, you can't keep your hands off each other. And then you have to try to work through the communication and the emotional piece of it. I think that's obviously so different than when you have a great emotional connection, but you don't have that physical connection. And I think that in the first case, in my opinion, with no research, that it's probably more likely that you can work something out if you have that physical attraction. But if you don't have a physical attraction and every time the person touches you, you cringe, I don't know that can ever be overcome. I don't know.
That's a tricky one. And
probably as a therapist, Kimmy has something to say.
I was like,
right.
I'll try to, because I know we have to go to commercial. This is something I deal with a lot with people, and it actually has to do more with their journey than it is like a black and white answer, because I've had people who have gotten into what I'll call lopsided relationships because they were getting caught up in the tornado and the physicality and the adrenaline rush, that kind of drug. And they ended up not being good for them, right? Because they never learned how to do the emotional. Conversely, I've had the other, where people like attract the friend, but then they have a sexless, kind of couple situation. So it's really about breaking your own patterns, because here's what I see is that the more evenly distributed all of these domains are in chemistry, those are the ones that tend to last the longest. So it is about the balance for sure.
Well, and I think, you'll cut me off, Jacalyn, if we've got to stop. I'll just remember what I was going to say.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I am probably a good example of one of those scenarios. I've been married 40 years. I met my husband, for our viewers that know New York City, running in Riverside Park, actually right across the street from where we live right now. And he was not so I saw him immediately. I mean, we had a physical experience with each other because we're running next to each other. And he was not at all he was not in the physical model of who I thought I would always, who I'd always dated. He was this long, lean, not muscular football type. He was a skinny marink, as people say, old people say. And we just built this, and here we are 40 years later, and we still hold hands when we're both, and I think that's a good distinction too, is that we're both very affectionate. And yes, we love each other, and yes, we're passionate, but that's a real criteria in terms of the physical connection with someone too. I could not be, and I remember saying that to my three brothers when we were younger, that we grew up in a very touchy family. And I said, I'm going to have a harder time finding a guy who just likes to snuggle and spoon in bed, and then you guys are going to have finding a woman who will do that. Because I know that's a very sexist thing to say, but women are often snugglier. And I'm definitely a snuggler, and my husband is 100%. And it's one of the ways that even when we're, banging at each other and mad about something, which still happens after 40 years, we can come back in that affectionate physical way.
Yes. Thank you. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk about something that somebody said to me once. It was the mother of a guy I was dating. And she said, sex only lasts like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. What about the rest of the hours in the day? They're the most important. So I want to talk about how important is a physical relationship. I mean, can you have a successful love without having that physical relationship? All right, sound good?
Yep. I like that topic.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us here on USA Global TV and Business Talk Radio.
Networking sucks and people suck at it, but nothing gives me more life than walking around and talking to people in an audience and really being able to identify, okay, I see where you're having trouble, let's work on fixing it. How do you help them? How do you provide value? My goal is to give them those tools to be able to go out and tackle that fear. Anywhere there's coffee is where I'll be. So I bring candy a lot to my speaking engagements. Like, of course that makes sense. I'm a little unconventional.
Ashley was very knowledgeable.
Very entertaining.
I learned a few new things, and to me that's the key.
What do you want them to say? How do you want to be perceived? You're going to get the most direct, tactical tips and practical takeaways when it comes to networking. These two here are super important. You'll remember once the conversation started.
I love the tips that she gave out. I hate networking with a passion, so I feel like I can go through a meeting or event and not feel so uncomfortable.
When you're going to a presentation, you want to be educated. You also want to be entertained.
She was really fun and really personable, and everything she was saying was just very relatable.
She's got a lot of great ideas.
That will make you stand out so fast.
She comes across as someone that likes what they do and just doesn't try to sell you something.
Activity breeds results. If you're not doing anything, you're not going anywhere.
Just made me want to start networking, which I never thought I'd say before.
A networking strategy that works for you.
Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Story Garden. Your host, Diane Boehm. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Diane Floyd Boehm tells wonderful stories that warm the heart, spark the imagination, and unite people and families across generations. For children, Diane's Harry the Camel connects with all of us who've ever wondered how different our lives might have been if only we'd been born something better, like a wonderful horse instead of an ordinary camel. In the end, we all learn along with Harry that there's nothing better than just being yourself. Diane's Little Girl in the Moon looks down on earthbound children and wonders if they know she's just like them. A story of love, home, and the bond between mother and daughter, its powerful theme that we're each of us different yet all of us the same plants a seed in children that promises to blossom within a loving and trusting grown-up. Diane's new biography, Rise, recounts the experiences of her grandmother, Ruby, to reveal the hidden strength of the human spirit. Ruby's story inspires all of us to become the best versions of ourselves. You'll find all of Diane's delightful books and much more at DianeFloydBoehm.com. Visit DianeFloydBoehm.com. That's DianeFloydBoehm.com.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Hey, welcome back to In the Name of Love here on USA Global TV and Business Talk Radio. With me is my co-host, Kimmy Seltzer. She is a dating strategist and confidence therapist. And our guest today is Deborah Roth. She's a relationship coach and interfaith minister. So I wanted to just tee up the idea of what is the success rate, or how successful are sexless relationships or relationships without that physical component. Over to you, Kimmy.
I feel like this is another reality show in the making. Right? Like, I think that could be like the spinoff of Love is Blind. To me, what distinguishes a kind of a love situation that has a sexual component versus one that's not. Again, it's what you are and what you're looking for. I mean, I've heard all kinds of situations now and arrangements. I will say that, to the point where I love the word situationship, because I think, everyone has a different situation. However, if you're looking for a sexual partner, if that is your true definition of a relationship, then it's over time, it's not going to work because you're seeking that, unless you get it somewhere else, and that's an arrangement, right? And then that's another situation. And for me, that's what distinguishes between, having a good LinkedIn exchange, a good friendship, versus one that's fun and flirty and kind of has a sexualized component to it.
I love it. Thank you, Kimmy. And how about you, Deborah? What say you about this?
I think, I definitely agree with Kimmy. I think it really is whatever it is that you both have to be on the same page. Either you're both very physical and that's going to be an important part of the relationship, or you both are not. And there were two books that came up, just popped into my head, Jacalyn, when you asked that question. One is one called September Songs. Maggie Scarf, I think, is the author. And she interviewed 200 couples or something. She interviewed a lot of couples who had been married like 30 years or more. And it's fascinating because it really rides the gamut of the kinds of couples that are in long-term relationships, and they're perfectly successful, maybe not by your criteria or my criteria, but for them it works because they've made an agreement about what's important. The other book that I think everybody should read, Couples and Singles, and I've got a ton of books, I'm sure you do too, Kimmy, is Hot Monogamy by Patricia Love. How's that? Born with a name like that, she had to do something related to love, right? And she one of the things that she talks about that's a key thing in successful relationships is the desire level of each of the couples. And if you're both on a low desire level, that's going to work. If you're both on a higher desire level, meaning that you're ready to jump into bed, and similarly, with the same timing, that'll work. But if you've got one down here and one up here, then that's where you can run into trouble. And you really need to look at ways that you can meet somewhere closer so that your desire levels, which is the physical component that we're talking about, the sexual component really, so that they're more in sync. If there's no good or bad or better or worse, it really is where the couple places themselves individually and then, brings it together and makes it work as a couple. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Follow-up question that I have for both of you, working with people who are planning on getting married, and this is really for our audience. What red flags come up for you and you say, oh, I don't know, there's some work to be done here, and what do you do about it in your role as your professional? I'll start with Deborah this time. Well, it's interesting. I've often said that because of the kinds of ceremonies that I do, they're not cookie cutter. They're not, they're really a co-creation. They're not boilerplate. So I've always felt like the couples that find somebody like me have already done a lot of their personal growth, self-discovery work. They already have some level of self-awareness, and they know that they don't want to just have a wedding ceremony where they show up and some officiant goes through it, and that there isn't a lot of thought. They're not interested in writing their own vows, all that kind of stuff. So for me, I don't run into it very often, but one of the very first, when I was first getting trained as a relationship coach, and this is now back, almost 20 years, I was getting trained in this particular program called Partners in Life, and I had a couple come to me that wanted to be married and they wanted to do premarital coaching. And so we started with, we set the wedding planning aside until we did some of the coaching. And it just had a weird vibe. And it felt like it was one of those ultimatum things like they'd been together for several years, and that the future bride had said, hey, kind of park it or drive it is how I put it. Either we get married or we break up. And I handed them this, the first couple exercises in this workbook, and they came back and, a week or so later, and he, who had never said a word in the whole process, walked in and said, I've realized doing these that I can't get married. So I think it really, I sort of use that. I send a relationship assessment. I don't require all of my couples to do premarital coaching, but I send all of them a premarital coaching assessment that just goes, through every possible thing you could imagine, from money to kids to religion to, you name it, that could come up in their marriage. And I encourage them. It said, that's the vows and doing that assessment are the two things that I really, really push them to do. And if they feel like there's some sticking points that come up out of that, then, we'll do some coaching sessions. But that, I think, is probably, and whenever anybody asks me what I think the most important element, the most important quality for a long-term successful relationship is that both couples are doing their ongoing, this is where a good therapist comes in, their ongoing personal growth and self-discovery work separately. And then they bring that to the relationship. So, a marriage assessment, a premarital assessment like that, as I said, most of my couples have done a lot of that work already. Thank goddess.
We do have a comment from Mr. Philip Chan. Thomas Carlyle said, there is one temple in the universe, the human body. We touch heaven when we touch the human body. In my work with some long-term couples having difficulties, they forget how to touch each other, even simple hugs or holding hands, etc. Kimmy, over to you for your comments.
Yeah, well, Deborah, I guess I see it first before they get to you, because I see a lot of stuff. And I just actually did a podcast on red flags and things to look for. But I'll just mention a couple of them. I think the overriding one is a level and a sense of feeling safe in the relationship. When you don't feel safe emotionally, physically, in every sense of the word, and there's something where you're feeling like you're either walking on eggshells, dancing around something, can't be yourself, you're finding yourself like dimming your own light because of this person, that is a red flag. And also, and this is kind of I guess a part of it is really like a lack of communication or different communication styles. So if a couple really can't see eye to eye and they're not able to, talk through conflict situations that come up, that's another red flag. And then some obvious ones, although, sometimes when you're in a relationship like this, you don't always see it, especially if there's a pattern of that, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, an intense feeling of rage or jealousy, when you feel like you're not being attended to in some way. And those are just, some of the soft things, but soft things, they're not very soft. I mean, they're pretty strong. However, again, sometimes when you're in it, you don't recognize it until you're out of it. And then you look back and you're like, wow, I didn't realize how hard it was. I didn't realize I wasn't myself. And that's the journey. And Deborah, to your point, it's not until you work on yourself and see why you're attracting a certain pattern of people, that's when you can start, really create change for yourself, breaking those patterns, because there's maybe things that you're doing to attract some of those, kind of red flag situations.
Exactly. And
Kimmy, oh, sorry, Deborah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, red flags or fears you were talking about at the top of the hour too. That in this conscious dating program that I do, we talk about identifying your self-limiting beliefs, which are similar. And those are the things, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. All the good men are taken, or, whatever that looks like. And to really being able to identify them is one of those ways that you open yourself up to and start to kind of shift the neural pathways that have been forged in that negative direction, whether it's a fear, whether it's a self-limiting belief, to come up with mantras, prayers, ways to reprogram the unconscious so that you can start to attract the people that you really want to attract.
That's so true. It's like we're like machines. We all have default buttons that we go back to, good, bad, or indifferent. It's just familiar, and it is a reprogramming. But you have to have some strategies in order to reprogram that. But to give people hope that knowing that you can empower yourself to create that for it does take that work and the awareness.
Definitely.
You bring up some really good points. There were some bells ringing for me when you talked about a red flag of jealousy. And I was in several relationships, different people, but really the same scenario where the guys were so jealous and, following me around, showing up when I'm with my friend, like all these things. It was like over and over again. And I didn't even realize it. My friends were realizing it. And so I finally broke that pattern. But then I saw other people in my life that they were going through the same thing and they couldn't see it. So it really is interesting how you are totally not aware of what's going on, and you have to take a step back and really work on yourself. And to your points, why are you attracting this? Why was I attracting it?
Right.
Insecurity and fear.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say, like, sometimes it's they look different, but they have this, it's like they have a different costume on, but when you take the costume off, they're the same people. You're like, wait a second, how did I get this guy again?
Right.
Or whatever.
Well,
What, Deborah?
No, I was just going to say, and hopefully I remember someone in one of my groups early on saying, she's saying, I find that, and she was really doing a lot of work on herself. And she said, I find that I am occasionally still attracting that kind of person, but I see it earlier. It's not going to just happen overnight that you have someone, like you, Kimmy, or me, that can help you with the strategies so that you don't continue those patterns, but to be able to see it faster. And pretty soon they just won't be coming into your orbit at all.
Yeah, that's
so true. I know. I was just talking with a client, and I look, these guys are going to be walking on this earth for as long as we live. Like, you can't get rid of them, right? Like, but you just, if you have the ammunition to fight and ward off them, right in the beginning stages, by you being different, by you having a different strategy, approach, and perception, that's when suddenly you won't even be attracted to them anymore. You'll be like, oh, there he is again. No, bye. And that's the journey, really.
And I think it's important to mention that I'm just going to put the word out there, narcissists, for example, that these types of people don't just exist in a personal relationship level. They also exist in business. There are plenty of narcissistic people that, you might find yourself doing business or having a certain client over and over and over again. And you have to say to yourself, this pattern looks really familiar. What am I going to do to break it?
So true. Well, and I think we also, I was just on a call with a really wonderful person she wrote The Art of Gathering, Priya, and I'm forgetting her last name, Priya Parker, talking about how everything has changed with the pandemic, how we relate to people. I mean, I've got couples that met during the pandemic and, slowly got to know each other and quarantined together, and now they're couples. One couple that I worked with who were supposed to get married during the pandemic, and I worked with them for months, and it was pretty clear that there were some issues there that weren't addressed. And there wasn't a whole lot more I could do. And I just heard from her, a couple, and we've been working together, just she and I, because she finally saw those red flags, woke up to it. And now she's putting herself out there on her own. It really took a lot for her to break this off because they were going to be married.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to, just in transparency, I was seeing a therapist in this relationship I was in for a very long time. And she said to me, just like this, she said, have you had enough yet? And I said, what do you mean? She said, you keep coming here and telling me it's this, it's this, it's this. You feel horrible. You're shrinking. You're like this big. Your self-esteem is, have you had enough yet? Or do you want more abuse? And that was the first time I opened my eyes and I thought, oh my gosh, like I have a role here. I have a decision that I can make. I have power. I just have to take my power back.
What a great question. Wow. Yeah.
I love that. But to your credit, and just to seeing the other side is, sometimes we act a certain way because that's where our confidence lives. So I know that there's like a big correlation between people who are beautiful, wonderful caregivers, and they would do the world for people, and narcissists love them because you put so much emphasis and focus on them. But it's also part of who you are. It's where your confidence lives. So your default button partly is giving people help and hope and the attention. So it is a weird thing to kind of pull that back a little bit and pace it out so people earn that from you more, rather than just like moving to that because you're just so used to it. And it's like a language. It's learning a totally different way of speaking and relating.
Definitely.
I love this. I get therapy right here on the air. It's great. Well, we're actually at the end of our show, and of course the time has just flown by as always. Deborah, I'm going to spotlight you. Please tell us where people can find you and who should reach out to you. And remember that people are listening and can't read the banner. So
okay. So Deborah Roth, my website is Spirited Living, spirit with an ED living.com. It's got all of my work there, my relationship coaching, the singles and couples programs that I have. If you want to get married, certainly those are the people that I love to hear from. And we didn't talk today, but another branch of what I do is working with people who are in transitions, because, that relationships fit into that too. I'm on Facebook at I guess it's Deborah Roth, somewhere in there, and Instagram, Spirited Deb Roth. And I've got a YouTube channel that has all kinds of fun goddessy things on it.
Wonderful.
Symbolic work that I do. It's
we have another comment. Hold on, let me run up and get it. Philip Chan, yes. Thank you, ladies.
Philip. Thank you, Philip.
And he's 5 hours ahead of us, so thank you for staying up with us. Yeah, he's in the UK. Deborah, it's been a pleasure seeing you, and you're welcome to come back to any of our shows and let us know what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Great to have you. Bye-bye. Kimmy, how about you? Where can people reach you? And do tell us also, I forgot to ask Deborah about Clubhouse, but tell us what you're doing over there if you are.
Yeah, I haven't been actually in Clubhouse lately, although I swear I'll get back to that. I've just been so busy doing classes and workshops, and so you could reach me if you go to my website, kimmyseltzer.com. That's the best place to reach me. But pretty much every handle is at Kimmy Seltzer on Instagram, on Facebook, everywhere. So it's easy to get a hold of me. And if you're interested in any of my services, like the Get Your Sexy Back class, just go to askkimmy.com, and then you'll be able to not only be in my community, but just ask me a direct question. So if you're listening to this, that's an easy way of just remembering.
And Kimmy, what about your show?
And yes, of course. And then I have my own podcast. I know I forgot. I have my own podcast. It's called The Charisma Quotient. You can catch that everywhere on iTunes and Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I do have an Amazon Live show as well. We're taking a little bit of a pause on summer, but hopefully we'll get back to that in the fall.
Before you go, what's your experience been like doing the Amazon Live?
It's been really interesting. It's a new platform. What I have loved, I just loved having another way of reaching people and different kinds of people, because obviously people who watch Amazon maybe didn't know that they needed, dating advice and that kind of thing. So it's been fun. I think, the rules are changing. I think they're still trying to figure it out, but it's been a super fun experience.
It's good to know. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure. I learned so much from you, and you look great.
Oh, thanks. You too. I like your pearls.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I'll see you next week.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. That is a wrap for today. If you missed any of our shows, starting with Celebrate Great Britain Royally Rich, please go over to our YouTube channel. Go over there anyway, USA Global TV, and subscribe, and you will be alerted to every time one of our shows is taking place. Now, for our shows for tomorrow, the 5 to 9 Club Creative Show with Deborah Wooten will not be showing tomorrow. We're taking a holiday for this week. She's got a lot of stuff going on over at Clubhouse, but do join us next week for that. And then we have, starting at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, which is 7 p.m. British Summer Time, A Better You, lessons from the best coaches, consultants, and trusted advisors. And we have a first-time presenter this week, Kevin Gergel, whom I've known for years. I used to work with him. And also Megan Sandwick is back with another great lesson. And I think she's going to speak on virtual assistants, which is wonderful. Okay, at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, which is 9 o'clock British Summer Time, we have It's All About Dating. It's All About Dating. I love that show. Lori Mendelson is my co-host, and Dr. Renee Modry is joining us as our guest. And then closing out the day, we have another segment of A Better You, lessons from the best coaches, consultants, and trusted advisors. And presenting is Mariska Duprier and Hyatt Ives. They'll be talking about mindsets and trade shows as we start to get back in the world and go to trade shows. So you don't want to miss either of those. And also, just a selfish plug, I'm plugging my book, Behind the Green Screen. And this is my story of how and why I left the corporate world. And then during a pandemic with no experience whatsoever, I started this platform, first on Zoom with the telephone and the radio station. Then we moved to StreamYard with one show, August 16th of last year. And now we have 18 shows a week. This week we'll have 17, but that's okay. So this book is a great read for anyone who wants to get into the broadcasting business, but it's also a great read if you have worked in corporate America, you're working there today, or if you'd like to get to know me a little bit better. We have a special promotion going over on Amazon, and you can pick up the ebook there. I think it's 99 cents, or you can get the paperback for $19.99. And if you want me to sign it, you want to buy a signed copy, you can contact me directly, Jacalyn at drjacalyn.com. That is a wrap for today. I want to thank all of our guests and our co-hosts. And again, pick up this book. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll see you later. I've got some family coming to visit, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. And I'm really happy to see all of you. So thanks again for being here. Bye.